ever look out the airplane window and wonder just like how those wings are actually keeping us up at 30,000 feet? Well, we're going way beyond the basics today. You ready for this? We are going to explore this fascinating world of airplane energy management.
Ooh, yes.
You're about to learn how pilots think about flying, not just like pulling levers and pushing buttons. Our source,
Yeah?
the FAA Airplane Flying Handbook. It's like the trusted guide
Uh-huh.
used by, well, pilots themselves.
Well, what's really fascinating about this handbook is it goes kind of beyond just the nuts and bolts,
Yeah.
of flying a plane. It kind of teaches you to think like a pilot, to see the airplane as like an energy system,
Yeah.
and almost like you need to master that system to stay in control.
Okay, so let's unpack this whole like energy system idea.
Yeah.
An airplane, I mean, it's obviously not a closed system.
Right.
It's burning fuel, interacting with the air. But how do we kind of picture this like in a way that makes sense to someone who's not a pilot?
So think of it like this. Okay, an airplane is constantly gaining energy from its fuel. It's losing it to the environment through things like drag. So it's kind of this dynamic balancing act,
Yeah.
almost like managing finances.
Hmm.
You've got income,
Yeah.
you've got expenses.
So the throttle is kind of like controlling your income, like pumping more energy into the
Yeah,
system.
precisely. And just like with finances, it's not just about how much you're bringing in, it's also about how you are spending it.
Mm.
And that's where the idea of potential and kinetic energy comes in.
Right. Okay. We all learned about those in school, but how do they relate to an airplane in flight?
So think of potential energy,
Yeah.
like your savings account. It's the energy stored by virtue of your altitude.
Okay.
So the higher you are, the more potential energy you have. Kinetic energy, on the other hand, is like spending cash.
Okay.
It's the energy of motion, your airspeed.
So if you want to climb, you kind of need to dip into your savings, trade some of that potential energy for kinetic energy to gain speed.
You're catching on quick. Now, here's where the FAA handbook gets really interesting. They stress that pilots don't actually care about their speed relative to the ground.
Hmm.
What matters is their energy state relative to the air they're flying in.
So why is that so important?
Well, because the ground and the wind are constantly changing,
Right.
right? What might look like a safe speed on your instruments
Hmm.
could actually be dangerously slow if you're facing a strong headwind,
Oh, wow.
right? That's why pilots rely on what's called indicated airspeed.
Okay.
It tells them how much energy they have available to maneuver, regardless of what's happening below.
So it's like checking your bank balance, not just the amount you just swiped on your debit card, because that doesn't tell the whole story of your financial situation. You need to know like how much you have available to spend.
Exactly. It's about understanding the true state of your energy account. Now, how do pilots actually manage this account?
Yeah.
That's where the throttle and elevator come in. The throttle, as we said, controls the overall energy flow, like the income, if you will.
Okay.
Right.
And the elevator, does that kind of control like where that energy goes? Like deciding, if you're going to invest in stocks or bonds.
It's more like deciding how much to allocate to your checking account versus your savings account.
Yeah.
So the elevator, by adjusting what's called pitch attitude,
Okay.
controls how that incoming energy is split between altitude and airspeed.
So if I'm understanding correctly, like pushing the throttle forward is like making a deposit.
Yes.
Increasing that overall energy.
Right.
But it's the elevator that determines how much of that energy goes into like gaining altitude versus gaining speed.
You got it. It's all about managing the balance between those two forms of energy. But there's another layer to this. It's not just about the amount of energy, it's also about the rate at which you can change that energy.
Here's where it gets really interesting. So tell me about this energy map I keep hearing about.
Yeah.
Like what is that?
So the handbook actually calls it an energy maneuverability map.
Okay.
It's this brilliant way to visualize an airplane's energy state, not just in terms of altitude and airspeed, but also how those factors affect its ability to maneuver.
So instead of a map showing like roads and landmarks, it's showing like different energy states of the airplane.
Precisely. And what's so cool is that pilots are trained to use this mental model in real time, constantly making adjustments based on changing conditions.
Oh, so they're actually picturing this map in their heads while they're flying.
Absolutely. It helps them understand how their control inputs will affect their energy state, especially in, critical situations.
This is starting to sound a lot more complex than just pulling back on the stick to go up.
That's right. Flying is all about energy management. It's about mastering the flow of energy to stay in control. And the FAA handbook provides a really unique roadmap to understanding that flow.
Okay. So we've got our like energy system, we've got our two main accounts, like our altitude and airspeed and our controls to kind of manage them. But how do pilots use all this to actually like fly the plane?
Well, that's where the concept of what we call specific excess power comes in.
Okay.
And that's what we'll dive into next.
Oh, I'm already on the edge of my seat. This is getting good.
Yeah.
All right. So you mentioned specific excess power. What exactly is that and why is it so important for pilots to understand?
Okay, so think of it like this. If you need to quickly climb over like a mountain range,
Okay.
you need a good amount of this specific excess power. It's almost like having extra horsepower in your car to accelerate up a steep hill, you know?
Yeah.
You need that kind of like reserve energy to make that climb safely.
So it's not just about having enough energy, it's about having enough energy available to quickly change your situation if needed.
Exactly. Specific excess power is the rate at which an airplane can change its energy state.
Okay.
It's like the difference between having wealth
Okay.
and having liquid assets.
Mm.
Right. So you might have like $1 million in real estate, but if you need to pay a bill today,
Yeah,
you need cash on hand.
you need that cash.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense. So how does this like specific excess power play into that Sturgy map we talked about earlier?
Well, so imagine you're plotting your flight path,
Yeah.
but not just in space,
Yeah.
but also in terms of energy as well.
Yeah.
Specific excess power tells you how quickly you can move between different points on that map.
Wow. So it's almost like having like a speed limit for how quickly you can change your altitude or airspeed.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And this is where things can get really interesting and even kind of dangerous if energy isn't managed correctly.
Yeah, the handbook highlights some like pretty scary scenarios where
Mhm.
things can go wrong. So let's dive into those, shall we? So let's start with a situation that you might even be familiar with as a passenger. Okay. You're on final approach for landing and suddenly you feel the plane drop a bit, you know? You're
Yeah.
descending below what's called the glide slope.
I've definitely felt that before.
Oh yeah. My heart always skips a beat when that happens. Like what's going through the pilot's mind at that moment?
Well, the first thing they're doing is assessing what kind of energy error they're dealing with.
Okay.
Okay. Because remember, it's not just about being too low. It's about the combination of altitude and airspeed.
Right.
Are they also slower, faster, or at the target speed?
Right, because that energy error matrix shows there are different like types of errors, not just one catch-all solution.
Right.
So let's say the plane is both lower and slower than it should be.
Okay.
What's the pilot's move?
Okay, so that's what we call a total energy error.
Okay.
Okay. They're lacking both potential energy from the altitude
Yeah.
and kinetic energy from the airspeed. In this case, they need to increase their total energy and fast. So they'll push that throttle forward, adding power.
Makes sense. It's like needing a quick like injection of cash into your account.
Right, exactly.
But what if they're low but going faster than they should be?
Okay, so that's what we call an energy distribution error.
Okay.
Okay, they have enough total energy, but it's not allocated correctly. They need to trade some of that excess speed for altitude.
So they would kind of pull back on the stick a bit, right? But wouldn't that also make the plane climb even faster potentially, like overshooting that glide slope?
You're right to be cautious. It's a very delicate balancing act.
Right.
They need to pitch up just enough to bleed off some of that excess speed and convert it into altitude without, overdoing it.
It's like making a quick transfer between your checking and your savings, just enough to cover that unexpected expense.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Okay, well, what if they're low but at the target speed?
Okay.
That seems tricky. That's where it gets really interesting. It's actually a combination of both energy errors.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so they need to increase their total energy and adjust the distribution.
So more throttle and a little pitch up. That sounds like some fancy footwork.
Exactly. It's about coordinating the throttle and elevator to, simultaneously address both sides of the problem. And this highlights a really crucial point. Even seemingly simple deviations can involve really complex energy dynamics.
Right.
It's about getting to the right spot on that energy map to recover safely.
It's not just about like fixing the altitude or fixing the speed. It's about getting that balance just right.
Exactly. Now imagine an even more critical scenario.
Okay.
You're flying towards rising terrain
Okay.
and you realize you might not be able to clear it.
Okay. This is starting to sound like like the setup for like a disaster movie.
Right.
I can definitely see how this would lead to that like irreversible energy loss that we talked about earlier.
Right. The handbook actually uses this really chilling example.
Yeah.
Okay? A pilot is taking off from a high-altitude airport on a hot day.
Uh-huh.
Okay? Hot, thin air reduces engine power, making it harder to climb.
So the plane is already starting off at an energy disadvantage.
Exactly.
Heck yeah.
Exactly. And to make matters worse, the pilot's instinct is to pitch up, trying to climb faster.
But wouldn't that actually make the situation worse? Because we just learned that pitching up trades speed for altitude.
Right.
So wouldn't that make them climb even slower?
That's the counterintuitive part. Okay.
Yeah.
In this scenario, pitching up actually leads to further speed loss,
Yeah.
pushing the plane closer to what's called a stall.
Wait, so even though the nose is pointed up,
Right.
the plane might not actually be climbing effectively.
That's right. It might even be descending despite appearances.
Wow.
Remember, it's all about the energy state, not just the attitude of the plane.
This is blowing my mind. It's like thinking you're putting more money into savings, but you're actually just draining your checking account even faster.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It highlights how, our intuition can really mislead us in these really critical situations.
Yeah.
And that's why pilots train extensively to recognize and manage these energy errors, even when their gut instincts tell them to do the opposite.
So what's the right move in this rising terrain scenario?
Yeah.
Like how do you avoid a potential disaster?
Again, it comes down to understanding those energy dynamics.
Yeah.
Okay. The key is to recognize that sometimes to climb you first, need to gain speed.
Wait, are you saying that even though you're like running out of altitude, the solution might be to actually pitch down to gain speed and increase that specific excess power?
Exactly. It seems counterintuitive.
Totally.
But by pushing forward on the elevator, you reduce drag and allow the engine to kind of build up enough energy to start climbing again. It's almost like taking a temporary loan to cover your expenses and give yourself time to increase your income.
This is a perfect example of how the FAA handbook goes beyond just teaching you, like how to fly a plane. It's teaching you how to think like a pilot.
Yeah.
To make those like split-second decisions that could mean the difference between, a safe flight and a catastrophe.
Yeah. It's about having that really deep understanding of energy management that allows you to act decisively even when it goes against your initial instincts.
Yeah, it is amazing how much goes on behind the scenes of just like a seemingly simple flight.
Right.
Like the level of awareness and decision making that pilots have to have is incredible.
Yeah, and what's even more impressive is that they're doing all of this while also managing, communications, navigation, and a whole host of other tasks.
Right.
Yeah. It's really a testament to their training and skill.
Yeah, the handbook really drives home the point that energy mismanagement can lead to some serious consequences.
Absolutely. Beyond the scenarios we've already talked about, the handbook highlights, other situations where things can go wrong.
Yeah.
Think about like a go-around after a botched landing attempt.
Okay.
Right. If the pilot forgets to retract the landing gear and flaps, the increased drag can rapidly just deplete the plane's energy. It's almost like suddenly hitting a huge unexpected expense.
Right. Or imagine making like a steeper than normal turn in the traffic pattern.
Right.
That can also lead to a dangerous loss of energy, especially at low altitude. It's like making a risky investment that doesn't pay off.
Exactly. And it's not just about stalls and spins either.
Right.
Even an unstalled plane can run out of energy if it's not managed correctly.
So what's the big takeaway here for all of us non-pilots listening in?
Right.
Like how can we apply this knowledge to our own lives even if we're not sitting in the cockpit?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that energy management isn't just for pilots. It's this fundamental principle that applies to so many areas of life. It's about understanding the balance between resources and demands, between input and output.
So whether we're managing our finances, our time, or even our own physical energy,
Yeah.
those same principles apply.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we have a limited pool of energy to draw from, and we need to use it wisely. We have to make those conscious choices about where we're investing our energy and how we're replenishing it.
This deep dive has been eye-opening. It's not just about learning like how planes fly. It's about learning how to think like a pilot, to anticipate, to adapt, and to kind of stay ahead of the curve.
Right. It's about developing a deeper understanding of what we call systems thinking. how things are interconnected and how seemingly small changes can have, these huge ripple effects.
So the next time I'm on a plane, I'll definitely be looking at it with a new appreciation for that complex dance of energy that's keeping us aloft. I'll also be thinking about how those same principles apply to my own life.
Yeah, the next time you're feeling overwhelmed, remember that energy map. Think about what's draining your energy. Think about what's replenishing it. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find yourself making better decisions, you know, both in the air and on the ground.
What a fantastic way to wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure learning from you.
The pleasure was all mine.
Yeah.
It's always rewarding to share these insights with curious minds.
And to all of you listeners out there, remember to keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never stop learning. You never know what fascinating discoveries are waiting for you on your own deep dives. Until next time, happy flying.